In the formidable mountain ranges of Kentucky, where the perilous wilderness road carved its treacherous passage toward the western frontier, there once existed an establishment that travelers referenced in hushed, almost sacred tones. Millbrook Inn, as chronicled in historical accounts, provided amenities that transcended conventional lodging, offering a profound warmth that surpassed mere accommodations and sustenance. 4 sisters administered this mountain refuge, and exhausted sojourners would arrive as complete strangers, yet depart with the profound sensation of having discovered something invaluable, something worthy of the hazardous return journey. The Cunningham sisters had cultivated a reputation that permeated 3 states. Commercial merchants would deliberately postpone their business ventures to extend their residency at Millbrook Inn. Cattle ranchers would navigate dangerous detours through hostile mountain passages rather than forfeit the opportunity to experience the sisters' legendary hospitality. Those who had experienced their accommodation spoke of comforts that solitary travelers seldom encountered, attention so personalized and intimate that mature men would become emotional when departure time arrived. However, during the winter of 1851, circumstances underwent a dramatic transformation. Travelers began arriving at settlements throughout Kentucky bearing disturbing testimonies. The route to Millbrook Inn, they claimed, had become strewn with abandoned wagons and riderless horses. Local authorities initially dismissed these reports as frontier hysteria until an undeniable pattern emerged. Dozens of men had vanished without trace, and the final location where anyone recalled seeing them was along the serpentine mountain path leading to the Cunningham sisters' welcoming entrance. Before we proceed with the chronicle of events that transpired in those isolated Kentucky mountains, I must request your participation. Please activate the subscription notification and engage with our content. Share your geographical location in the comments. I appreciate connecting with listeners nationwide who share my fascination with America's concealed historical mysteries. What authorities were about to uncover would reveal that the warmth travelers discovered at Millbrook Inn exacted a price far more terrifying than anyone could have conceived. The Cunningham legacy. The year 1831 marked the death of Jeremiah Cunningham from consumption, leaving behind a prosperous mountain estate and 4 daughters ranging from 16 to 26 years of age. Situated in the remote highlands between Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and the Kentucky frontier, the Cunningham property encompassed 800 acres of fertile mountainous terrain, complete with livestock, agricultural fields, and most significantly, are strategically positioned in serving travelers navigating westward on the wilderness road. Margaret, the eldest at 26, possessed the acute intellectual capacity of a natural entrepreneur and the calculating disposition that would later prove lethal. Catherine, 24, had inherited their mother's ethereal beauty and an almost preternatural ability to make any gentleman feel like the most significant individual in existence. Sarah, 22, shared her deceased mother's knowledge of mountain herbalism and their various properties, knowledge that would prove far more sinister than anyone imagined. Elizabeth, the youngest at 16, possessed an innocent charm capable of disarming even the most suspicious traveler. The Cunningham estate had been established by their grandfather in 1798, when the wilderness road was merely a dangerous trail carved through hostile territory. By 1831, it had evolved into one of the most respected waypoints for merchants, settlers, and adventurers heading toward Kentucky's promising bluegrass region. The main residence, a substantial 2-story log construction with stone foundations, sat prominently on a ridge overlooking the valley below. The portion consisted of 6 comfortable guest chambers, a spacious common area with massive stone fireplaces, and a kitchen capable of accommodating dozens. What distinguished the Cunningham establishment wasn't merely its location or amenity, was the reputation for hospitality that had been meticulously cultivated over 3 decades. Travelers would discourse in towns hundreds of miles distant about the warmth of the Cunningham welcome, the quality of their mountain whiskey, and the comfort of clean bedding after weeks on dangerous roads. Jeremiah had constructed something more valuable than gold: trust. The property employed a small but devoted staff. Ezra Hawthorne, a weathered mountain man in his 50s, had served as foreman since the inn's early days. His knowledge of the mountains was encyclopedic, and his loyalty to the Cunningham family was absolute. 2 German immigrants, the Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, had arrived 3 years earlier, seeking employment and stability in the New World. They resided in a cabin near the property's eastern boundary and managed the livestock and agricultural operations with Germanic efficiency. The golden years, begin the autumn of 1831, marked the commencement of what locals would later remember as the inn's golden years. The sisters, initially collaborating from necessity, discovered they possessed a remarkable ability to make guests feel not merely welcome, but genuinely cherished. Margaret's business acumen maintained the operation's profitability. Catherine's charm encouraged guests to linger beyond their planned duration. Sarah's knowledge of mountain cuisine and medicinal teas enhanced their reputation for comfort, and Elizabeth's youthful enthusiasm made even the most weary travelers smile. However, something more sinister was developing beneath this facade of mountain hospitality. The isolation that had once protected the Cunningham family from frontier dangers now provided something entirely different: privacy. And privacy for 4 young women with sharp intellects and few scruples could prove exceedingly dangerous. The first victim was a November evening in 1832, when Thomas Kellerman arrived at Millbrook Inn, bringing with him the first indication of the darkness to come. Kellerman was a cattle purchaser from Richmond, traveling alone with a substantial purse of gold coins intended for Kentucky acquisitions. He was a 45-year-old man, recently widowed, with no children and few close connections, precisely the type of guest the sisters would later learn to identify with terrifying precision. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and light snow was beginning to fall when Kellerman's horse stumbled up the winding path to the inn. Margaret greeted him at the entrance with her practiced smile, immediately noting the quality of his attire, the weight of his saddlebags, and most importantly, the loneliness in his eyes. A man traveling alone just 1 year after losing his wife was carrying more than money. He was carrying a desperate need for human connection. "Welcome to Millbrook Inn," Margaret announced, her voice carrying precisely the right mixture of professionalism and warmth. "I am Margaret Cunningham, and these are my sisters. We shall ensure your stay exceeds all expectations." Kellerman's eyes brightened as he absorbed the warm glow of the common room, the aroma of Sarah's venison stew, and the sight of Catherine arranging fresh wildflowers despite the season. This was exactly what a lonely widower required: a place where beautiful, attentive women would treat him like family, rather than merely another paying customer. Over the subsequent 3 days, the sisters provided Kellerman with an experience unlike any he had ever encountered at an inn. Sarah's meals were restaurant-quality feasts, featuring perfectly seasoned game, fresh bread, and her famous honey cakes. Margaret engaged him in lengthy conversations about business and politics, making him feel intellectually valued. Elizabeth's innocent laughter at his stories made him feel worldly and important. But it was Catherine who provided what Kellerman truly craved: the illusion of romance. On his second evening, after other guests had retired, Catherine found Kellerman sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames with the hollow expression of a man who had lost everything meaningful. She approached with 2 glasses of Sarah's special spiced rum, each warming perfectly in crystal tumblers that caught the firelight. "You appear troubled, Mr. Kellerman," she said, settling into the chair beside him with fluid grace. "Sometimes, sharing a burden makes it lighter." For the next 2 hours, Kellerman found himself revealing his heart to this beautiful woman who listened with such genuine attention. He spoke of his late wife Mary, of their failed attempts to have children, of returning each evening to an empty house that still carried the faint scent of her lavender soap. Catherine listened with perfect sympathy, occasionally touching his hand or leaning closer with apparent compassion. "Loneliness is a terrible affliction," she said softly, as the fire burned lower, "but it need not be permanent." What transpired next was never recorded in any official document, but Kellerman's behavior the following morning told its own story. He moved through breakfast with the satisfied expression of a man who had rediscovered reasons for living. He extended his stay by 2 additional days, despite his original urgency to reach Kentucky. Most tellingly, he began making plans to return to Millbrook Inn on his homeward journey to Richmond. "I have never experienced hospitality of this caliber," he told Margaret as he prepared to depart. "You and your sisters have created something truly exceptional here. I shall recommend this establishment to every traveler I encounter." Margaret smiled and accepted his generous payment, nearly double the standard rate. Pressed into her hands with genuine gratitude. "We anticipate your return. Visit, Mr. Kellerman. Safe travels." But Thomas Kellerman would never complete his journey to Kentucky. His horse was discovered 3 days later. Wandering riderless near Cumberland Gap, Kellerman himself had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that would never be officially investigated. The assumption illogical enough, for the dangerous frontier was that he had fallen victim to bandits or wild animals. Only the Cunningham sisters knew the truth. Heinrich Zimmer had been waiting in the woods half a mile from the inn when Kellerman departed that morning. The German immigrant was skilled with tools and possessed the quiet efficiency that made him valuable for tasks requiring discretion. Kellerman never saw the blow that ended his life, delivered with a blacksmith's hammer to the base of his skull. His body was wrapped in canvas and buried in a predetermined location deep in the mountain forest, while his substantial purse of gold coins found its way back to Millbrook Inn. That night, the four sisters sat around their kitchen table counting Kellerman's money and planning their future. Margaret had performed the calculations. The amount they had just acquired exceeded the inn's legitimate profits for an entire year. Catherine had proven that lonely men could be manipulated with shocking ease. Sarah had demonstrated that traces of evidence could be eliminated with proper knowledge of chemistry and mountain craft. Elizabeth had shown that even the most innocent-seeming person could keep terrible secrets. "He will not be missed for weeks," Margaret said, stacking the gold coins with businesslike precision. "No family, no close friends, traveling alone to a place where no one knows him. Perfect." It was almost effortless, Catherine added, still wearing the same gentle expression she had used to comfort their victim. "He would have given us anything we requested." What they had discovered that cold November night was something far more valuable than gold. They had discovered how to make people disappear. Perfecting the system, the winter of 1832 provided the sisters time to refine their technique and establish the protocols that would serve them for nearly 2 decades. Margaret, with her keen business mind, developed a system for identifying ideal targets. The perfect victim was a man traveling alone, carrying substantial money, with few family connections and no fixed schedule that would raise immediate alarm if he failed to arrive at his destination. Sarah's role evolved beyond cooking and household management. Her knowledge of mountain plants expanded to include detailed study of toxins and their effects. Pokeweed berries, when properly prepared, could induce symptoms resembling cholera. Foxglove could cause heart failure that appeared. Natural water hemlock could kill within hours while leaving minimal trace. She established a concealed garden behind the main house where she cultivated these plants alongside legitimate herbs, creating a pharmaceutical arsenal disguised as a medicine patch. Catherine perfected the art of emotional manipulation, learning to read men's deepest needs and present herself as the answer to their loneliness. She studied her targets carefully, adapting her personality to match their desires. For the religious, she became devoutly spiritual. For the intellectual, she transformed into a well-read conversationalist. For the grieving, she offered comfort and understanding. Her ability to become whatever a man needed was both her greatest weapon and her most chilling talent. Elizabeth, despite her youth, proved crucial to the operation's success. Her genuinely innocent appearance provided perfect cover for the family's activities. Suspicious guests found it impossible to maintain their wariness around a girl who seemed incapable of deception. She also served as the early warning system, her naturally friendly demeanor allowing her to extract information about guests' backgrounds, travel plans, and financial situations without raising suspicion. The logistics of disposal had been worked out with Germanic efficiency by the Zimmer brothers. Klaus had discovered a series of natural caves in the mountainside, accessible only through a concealed entrance behind a rockfall. Bodies could be transported there under cover of darkness and sealed behind loose stones, where the mountain's chemistry would accelerate decomposition. Personal effects were carefully sorted. Anything valuable was retained, while items that might identify the victim were buried separately or destroyed. Ezra Hawthorne's role was perhaps the most crucial. His reputation in the region was beyond reproach, and his word carried weight with local authorities. When questions were occasionally raised about missing travelers, Ezra would solemnly confirm that the individual had indeed stayed at Millbrook Inn but had departed in good health and spirits. His weathered face and honest demeanor had never failed to satisfy even the most persistent inquirer. The second victim, the spring of 1833, brought their second victim, William Fraser, a tobacco merchant from North Carolina. Fraser was transporting nearly $500 in silver coins, the proceeds from a successful season's crop sales. He was a 30-year-old bachelor, known for his reclusive nature and his practice of making business trips alone to avoid sharing profits with partners. Fraser arrived on a rainy April evening, immediately drawn to the warmth and comfort of the inn. After weeks of uncomfortable travel, the sisters deployed their refined strategy with precision. Margaret engaged him in business discussions, learning about his financial situation and travel plans. Sarah provided exceptional meals that made him reluctant to continue his journey. Elizabeth entertained him with piano, music and innocent charm that reminded him of the daughter he had never had. But it was Catherine who sealed Fraser's fate. On his third night at the inn, she found him reading alone in the common room, a leather-bound volume of poetry open on his lap. She approached with apparent shyness, asking if he might read aloud. As she had little education but loved the sound of beautiful words, for 2 hours, Fraser read to Catherine by lamplight, his voice growing stronger and more confident as she listened with rapt attention. When he finished, she placed her hand gently on his arm and told him he had the most beautiful voice she had ever heard. The loneliness that had hardened around Fraser's heart for decades began to crack. "I have never met anyone like you," he told her, his voice thick with emotion he had suppressed for years. "You make me feel alive again." "Then do not leave tomorrow," Catherine replied, her eyes reflecting the lamplight with perfect calculated sincerity. "Stay another day. Let me listen to you read again." Fraser extended his stay by a week, during which Catherine gradually increased their intimacy, while Sarah began introducing small amounts of pokeweed extract into his evening tea. The symptoms began: subtly mild stomach discomfort, slight dizziness, nothing alarming enough to cause immediate concern. Fraser attributed his malaise to the stress of travel and the emotional upheaval of his unexpected romantic feelings. On his final night at Millbrook Inn, Catherine invited Fraser to join her for a private dinner in her room. Sarah had prepared his favorite meal along with a bottle of wine laced with a carefully calculated dose of water hemlock extract. As Fraser sat across from Catherine in the intimate candlelight, sharing his dreams and fears with a woman he believed might change his life forever, he had no idea he was already dying. The poison worked exactly as Sarah had predicted. Fraser's death appeared to be a sudden heart attack brought on by excitement and overexertion. His body was discovered the next morning in Catherine's bed, apparently having died peacefully in his sleep after a night of passion. Even if a doctor had been available to examine the body, the symptoms perfectly matched those of natural cardiac failure in a middle-aged man with a previously sedentary lifestyle. Fraser was buried with appropriate solemnity in the inn's small cemetery, a final touch that Margaret had added to their operation. A proper grave complete with a carved headstone gave the appearance of respectful treatment while actually serving as the perfect hiding place. The cemetery contained the graves of several generations of Cunningham family members, making additional burials unremarkable to local observers. Fraser's money and valuable personal effects disappeared into the sisters' growing treasury, while his wagon and horses were sold to traveling merchants passing through weeks later. His disappearance was attributed to a decision to settle in Kentucky rather than return to North Carolina. Plausible explanation that no one thought to question too closely. The golden years of murder between 1834 and 1845, Millbrook Inn achieved a reputation that extended throughout the mid-Atlantic region and beyond. Travelers spoke of it in the same reverent tones reserved for the finest establishments in Richmond or Baltimore. The sisters had created something unprecedented, a remote mountain inn that provided luxury accommodations and service that rivaled the best urban hotels. Margaret had expanded their legitimate business operations significantly. The inn now maintained a stable of quality horses for guests, operated a small distillery producing premium mountain whiskey, and even offered guided hunting expeditions led by Ezra Hawthorne. These legal enterprises provided substantial income and, more importantly, gave the sisters a reputation as savvy businesswomen rather than simply innkeepers. The guest registry from this period, carefully preserved in the Virginia State Archives, tells the story of their success. Merchants from Charleston, politicians from Richmond, land speculators from Baltimore, and adventurers from as far away as Boston signed their names in Margaret's elegant ledger book. Many returned multiple times, becoming regular patrons who praised Millbrook Inn to their colleagues and friends. But hidden within this legitimate success was a carefully orchestrated, killing machine that operated with clockwork precision. The sisters had refined their victim selection to an exact science. Catherine developed an almost supernatural ability to identify the men who would never be missed, the loners, the outcasts, the ones carrying secrets that made them avoid close relationships. Sarah's knowledge of poisons had expanded to include dozens of plant and mineral toxins, each with different symptoms and detection profiles. Elizabeth had learned to extract detailed personal information from guests through seemingly innocent conversation, and Margaret coordinated everything with the precision of a military operation. During these years, they claimed approximately 43 victims, the exact number later found by the railroad surveyor. Each death was carefully planned and executed according to strict protocols that minimized risk while maximizing profit. The sisters developed detailed profiles of their targets, sometimes observing potential victims for weeks before making their final decision. Case study. Jonathan Waverley. Consider the case of Jonathan Waverley, a land surveyor from Pennsylvania who arrived in September 1838. Waverley was conducting mapping work for the state government, a job that required him to travel alone through remote areas for months at a time. He carried surveying equipment worth considerable money, along with payment for his work and funds for purchasing land parcels he had identified as investment opportunities. Margaret immediately recognized Waverley as an ideal target. His work required extended absences from civilization, meaning his disappearance might not be noticed for months. His surveying activities provided a perfect cover story. He could easily have fallen victim to any number of natural hazards while working alone in dangerous territory. Most importantly, his somewhat antisocial personality meant he had few close friends who would pursue investigations if he failed to return. The sisters began their campaign immediately. Sarah prepared special meals featuring game Waverley had watched Ezra hunt, creating a connection between the food and the rugged mountain environment he found so appealing. Elizabeth engaged him in conversations about his mapping work, expressing fascination with his technical knowledge and making him feel appreciated for his expertise. Margaret discussed potential land investments with him, positioning herself as a local expert who could help him identify profitable opportunities. But it was Catherine who provided the element that sealed Waverley's fate. She approached him not as a potential romantic conquest, but as a kindred spirit who shared his love of the wilderness. She revealed an apparently extensive knowledge of mountain flora and fauna gleaned from years of careful study that actually served her poison research. She accompanied him on short surveying expeditions around the inn's property, demonstrating a comfort with outdoor life that Waverley found irresistible. "I have never met a woman who understood the mountains the way you do," Waverley told her during one of their excursions, his professional reserve finally cracking. "Most people see only wilderness, but you see the beauty and the order underneath." "I have lived here all my life," Catherine replied, stepping closer to him as they stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. "The mountains have taught me things that books never could, things about life, about death, about the balance between them." Waverley extended his planned 2-day stay into 3 weeks, ostensibly to conduct more thorough surveying work in the area, but actually because he had fallen completely under Catherine's spell. During this time, Sarah gradually introduced increasingly potent toxins into his food, creating symptoms that mimicked the early stages of mountain fever, a genuine hazard that had claimed the lives of several surveyors in recent years. The poison Sarah used for Waverley was her own innovation, an extract from destroying angel mushrooms that produced liver failure over the course of several days. The symptoms perfectly matched those of mountain fever, and even an experienced doctor would have been unlikely to distinguish between the two conditions. Waverley's death appeared to be a tragic but entirely predictable occupational hazard. His surveying equipment was sold to a merchant in Kentucky, while his detailed maps became part of Margaret's growing collection of intelligence about the region's geography and resources. His body joined the others in the sealed mountain caves, while his name was added to the local records as another victim of the dangerous frontier lifestyle. Maintaining respectability, the brilliance of the sisters' operation lay not just in their killing methods, but in their ability to maintain the illusion of respectability. They attended church services in the nearby settlement of Millbrook, contributed generously to community causes, and maintained friendships with local families. Margaret served on the board of the Regional Merchants Association, while Sarah provided medical assistance to neighboring farms during times of illness. Catherine taught Sunday school to local children, and Elizabeth organized social events that brought together isolated mountain families. This community involvement served multiple purposes. It provided them with alibis and character witnesses for times when questions might be raised about missing guests. It gave them access to information about travelers passing through the region. Most importantly, it established them as pillars of the community whose word would never be questioned by local authorities. The sisters also developed an extensive network of business relationships that helped legitimize their growing wealth. They invested in land purchases throughout the region, gradually assembling a portfolio of properties that generated rental income and appreciated in value. They loaned money to local farmers and merchants, earning both interest payments and influence within the community. They even purchased shares in several riverboat companies operating on the Ohio River, diversifying their investments while creating additional sources of income. By 1845, the Cunningham sisters were among the wealthiest landowners in Western Virginia. Their success story was held up as an example of what determined women could achieve, even in the challenging frontier environment. Local newspapers occasionally featured articles about the enterprising Cunningham sisters, who had built a thriving business empire from their inherited mountain property. But beneath this facade of legitimate success lay the carefully concealed bones of more than 40 men who had made the fatal mistake of accepting the sisters' hospitality. Each death had added to their wealth and refined their methods, creating a cycle of murder and profit that seemed impossible to stop or detect. The beginning of the end came not from law enforcement or suspicious relatives, but from an unexpected source. One of their own employees, Heinrich Zimmer, the younger of the two German brothers, had been growing increasingly unstable since a hunting accident in the fall of 1849 that left him with chronic pain and a dependence on laudanum for relief. Heinrich had always been the more sensitive of the Zimmer brothers, and the years of participating in the sisters' crimes had taken a psychological toll that his brother, Klaus, either ignored or failed to recognize. The laudanum, initially prescribed by Sarah for legitimate pain relief, had gradually become Heinrich's escape from the guilt and nightmares that plagued his sleep. But addiction brought its own problems: paranoia, mood swings, and a tendency toward loose talk that made him increasingly dangerous to the operation. The crisis began on a cold February morning in 1850 when Heinrich appeared at the kitchen door of the main house, his eyes wild with drug-induced panic and his clothes disheveled from a sleepless night. Sarah was alone in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for a traveling merchant from North Carolina who had arrived the previous evening. Man the sisters had already identified as their next target. "I cannot continue," Heinrich whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "I see their faces every night. Every time I close my eyes, they are all standing there watching me. 43 men, Sarah, 43 souls crying out for justice." Sarah maintained her composure, but her mind raced as she calculated the threat Heinrich now represented. His knowledge of their crimes was complete and detailed. He could provide authorities with exact locations of burial sites, descriptions of murder methods, and testimony that would send all 4 sisters to the gallows. "You are not well, Heinrich," she said gently, moving closer to him with apparent concern. "The laudanum is affecting your mind. You are seeing things that are not real." "No." Heinrich's voice rose dangerously, and Sarah glanced toward the ceiling, hoping the guest upstairs had not been awakened. "I know what we have done. I know what you have made me do, and I know it must stop." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Heinrich alternating between tearful confessions and angry accusations, while Sarah tried to calm him without alerting the rest of the household. She eventually managed to convince him to return to his cabin with a promise that they would discuss the situation later, after he had had time to rest and clear his head. But Sarah knew there would be no later discussion. Heinrich Zimmer had become a liability that threatened everything they had built, and liabilities had to be eliminated. That evening, after their guest had retired for the night, Sarah prepared a special dinner for the Zimmer bros, a gesture of appreciation for their years of loyal service. She explained to Klaus. The meal featured Heinrich's favorite dishes along with Sarah's special spiced wine that contained enough concentrated foxglove extract to stop a man's heart within hours. Heinrich died quietly in his sleep that night, his death attributed to the same heart condition that had supposedly claimed several of their guests over the years. Klaus, who had consumed less of the poisoned wine due to his natural temperance, survived, but with significant cardiac damage. That left him weakened and dependent on Sarah's medical care. Heinrich's death solved their immediate problem, but created new challenges. Klaus, despite his physical weakness, began asking pointed questions about his brother's sudden demise. The similarities between Heinrich's symptoms and those exhibited by several of their guests had not escaped his notice, and his loyalty to the sisters was wavering under the weight of suspicion and grief. Margaret recognized that their operation was entering a critical phase. The network of trust and complicity that had protected them for nearly 2 decades was beginning to fracture, and any significant investigation would uncover evidence that even their considerable influence could not suppress. She began making contingency plans for the possibility that they might need to abandon Millbrook Inn. The final victim, the final guest to die at Millbrook Inn, was Samuel Hartwell, a cotton broker from Savannah who arrived in March 1851 with over $1,000 in gold coins and banknotes. Hartwell was a widower in his 50s, traveling north to negotiate contracts with textile mills in Pennsylvania. His death followed the sisters' established pattern of parent heart failure after several days of exceptional hospitality that included intimate companionship with Catherine. But Hartwell's death marked a crucial change in the sisters' methodology. For the first time in nearly 20 years, they made a significant mistake. Hartwell had arranged to meet a business associate in Pittsburgh on a specific date, and when he failed to appear, his colleague began making inquiries that eventually reached local authorities in Virginia. Sheriff Thomas Brennan of Millbrook County was a capable lawman with over 20 years of experience, but he had never encountered anything like the Cunningham sisters' operation. His initial investigation was routine, a few questions to confirm that Hartwell had indeed stayed at the inn and departed in good health. Margaret and Ezra provided their usual testimony, supported by carefully maintained guest records that showed Hartwell's departure date and intended destination. But Brennan was more persistent than previous inquirers, and his investigation began, uncovering small inconsistencies in the sisters' story. A blacksmith in the next county remembered shoeing a horse that matched the description of Hartwell's mount, but several days after the businessman was supposed to have passed through the area, a merchant recalled purchasing supplies from someone who resembled Hartwell. But again, the timing did not match the official departure date from Millbrook Inn. These discrepancies were minor, and might have been explained by any number of innocent factors, but they were enough to plant seeds of doubt in Brennan's mind. He began looking more closely at other missing persons cases involving travelers who had last been seen in the Millbrook Inn area, and the pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. The investigation intensified. Sheriff Brennan's investigation accelerated rapidly once he began examining the broader pattern of disappearances around Millbrook. In his review of county records, revealed that over the past 20 years, at least 15 different missing persons cases had involved travelers who were last confirmed to be staying at the Cunningham property. While individual cases could be explained by the various hazards of frontier travel, the statistical clustering was impossible to ignore. Brennan was careful not to alert the sisters to his investigation, conducting his inquiries discreetly and avoiding direct contact with anyone connected to the inn. His breakthrough came when he interviewed Klaus Zimmer during one of the German immigrants' rare trips to town for supplies. Klaus, still grieving his brother's death and increasingly suspicious about the circumstances surrounding it, proved more talkative than usual. "My brother Heinrich was troubled before he died," Klaus told Brennan during what appeared to be a casual conversation outside the general store. "He spoke of things that kept him awake at night. The mountains hold many secrets, Sheriff, and not all of them should stay buried." This cryptic statement might have meant nothing to a less experienced investigator, but Brennan recognized the signs of a man struggling with dangerous knowledge. He arranged a private meeting with Klaus at a location far from Millbrook Inn where the full truth finally began to emerge. Klaus's confession was halting and incomplete. Years of fear and loyalty struggled against guilt and suspicion as he revealed fragments of what he knew. He could not bring himself to explicitly accuse the sisters of murder, but he provided enough details about mysterious late-night activities, unexplained burials, and his brother's growing distress to give Brennan the evidence he needed to obtain search warrants. The raid on Millbrook Inn was conducted at dawn on April 15, 1851, with a force of 8 armed deputies surrounding the property to prevent escape. Brennan had coordinated with federal marshals to ensure that any evidence found would be properly handled. Recognizing that the case might involve crimes across state lines, the sisters met the arrival of law enforcement with characteristic composure. Margaret greeted Brennan at the front door with polite concern, expressing hope that she could assist with whatever investigation had brought him to their property. Catherine appeared genuinely distressed by the suggestion that anything improper might have occurred at their respectable establishment. Sarah offered to prepare refreshments for the officers, while Elizabeth seemed confused and frightened by the accusations being leveled against her family, but their practiced performances could not conceal the physical evidence that 20 years of murder had left behind. The search of the main house revealed several items that clearly belonged to missing travelers: a distinctive silver pocket watch engraved with Samuel Hartwell's initials, a leather portfolio containing business documents belonging to Thomas Kellerman, and a collection of personal letters and photographs that represented dozens of different victims. More damning still was Sarah's carefully maintained garden of poisonous plants, which included several species that had no legitimate medicinal applications. Her collection of books on botany and chemistry revealed an expertise in toxicology that went far beyond the knowledge required for normal household remedies. Hidden in her private room, investigators found detailed notes describing the effects and dosages of various plant toxins, along with records that clearly corresponded to the deaths of specific guests. The discovery of the burial caves was the final piece of evidence needed to confirm the scope of the sisters' crimes. Klaus, facing charges as an accessory to murder, led investigators to the concealed entrance behind the rockfall. Inside the caves, exactly as the railroad surveyor would find them months later, were the skeletal remains of 43 men, along with personal effects worth thousands of dollars. Each skeleton told its own story of violent death. The puncture wounds found at the base of several skulls indicated that some victims had been killed quickly with sharp instruments, likely while they were unconscious from poison or alcohol. Others showed signs of strangulation or suffocation. A few appeared to have died from poison alone, their bones showing the chemical changes associated with heavy metal toxicity. The trial of the Cunningham sisters became one of the most sensational legal proceedings in Virginia history. Newspapers throughout the country covered the case, fascinated by the story of 4 women who had operated one of the most successful criminal enterprises in American history. The prosecution, led by Commonwealth Attorney Daniel Hutchinson, presented overwhelming evidence of a conspiracy that had lasted nearly 20 years and claimed more than 40 lives. Margaret maintained her innocence throughout the proceedings, claiming that any evidence found at the inn had been planted by enemies seeking to destroy their family's reputation. Catherine broke down completely during her testimony, alternating between denials and tearful confessions that implicated all 4 sisters in the murders. Sarah refused to speak at all, maintaining a stoic silence that many interpreted as an admission of guilt. Elizabeth, the youngest and most sympathetic defendant, claimed to have been coerced by her older sisters and begged for mercy from the court. The defense strategy focused on the isolation and vulnerability of 4 orphaned women trying to survive in a dangerous frontier environment. The sisters' attorney, Marcus Fairfield, argued that they had been driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond their control, and that their youth and gender should be considered as mitigating factors in their sentencing. But the overwhelming evidence and the shocking scope of their crimes made any sympathy difficult to sustain. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts for all 4 defendants on multiple counts of murder. In the first degree, the sentencing was swift and final. Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were condemned to hang, their executions scheduled for October 12, 1851. Elizabeth, largely due to her age at the time the crimes began and her apparent cooperation with authorities, received a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The executions and aftermath. The executions were carried out as scheduled on a grey October morning, with hundreds of spectators gathering to witness the end of the Cunningham sisters' story. Margaret faced her death with the same cold composure she had shown throughout the trial, offering no final words of remorse or explanation. Catherine and Sarah stood together on the scaffold, holding hands as the nooses were placed around their necks, their final moment of sisterly solidarity, a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty they had shown their victims. Elizabeth Cunningham was transported to the Virginia State Penitentiary in Richmond, where she would spend the remaining 37 years of her life. Prison records indicate that she maintained